Hello, freshmen. This is an updated video for how to do a TPCASTT, which I know that's not exactly how the letters go on this, but that's how you say it, even though the spelling doesn't quite work. This is our tool for analyzing poetry that you're going to use for the next 4 years. And the problem with poetry, I find with a lot of kids is, first of all, they want to know that I'm not going to make them write it. And I rarely do that, so it's okay. But also when I ask them to read a poem, they tend to get a little upset about that because they feel like poetry is mysterious, hard to understand. It's so few words. There's supposed to be meaning here. What, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I found that this tool, this TPCASTT tool, is incredibly successful in kind of demystifying poetry. Basically, it's just a series of steps. And if you follow the steps, you do them one in the right order and then, one at a time, that by the end of it, you're going to have a really good understanding of the poem. So this is kind of the tool we use. And the TPCASTT handout is the back of the nuts and bolts handout, which you have in your binder. I'm including on Classroom the entire nuts and bolts handout, but it's at the very back. So let's look at this. The very first thing you need to know is that the first step is kind of time sensitive because you want to deal with the title without reading the poem. So before you read the poem, and most of the time, if we're in the classroom, I'm going to read it to you so you can hear it. You want to look at the title and answer the questions. And when you write this on paper, you just literally write like capital T, and then, what do you say about the title? And then P, here's, the paraphrase, and so on and so forth. But before you read the poem, write down what the title makes you think of. What does it, remind you of? Anything and everything. There's no wrong answer here. It's basically just kind of getting your brain going on the title. The next step after you have written down what you think about the title is to read the poem, or to listen to me read it to you, or listen to somebody else read it to you. And after that, there's kind of a two-step process with the paraphrase. Now, paraphrase, means to put something in your own words. But poetry, sometimes it's not like reading, a paragraph in a textbook where you can read the paragraph and go, okay, yeah, I understand that. Sometimes you really have to break poetry down, stanza by stanza. And so I think of paraphrase as two parts. The first thing is when I have the poem in front of me, and the poem we are going to work with today, if I can get to the right place, it's called Making a Fist. So when you've got this in front of you, what I would suggest you do is out to the side, you want to write what's going on. Okay. Now you don't have to do this for every line. There's no like word count requirement when you paraphrase on the poem. It's just what is happening. And what you want to restrict yourself to, and what can be really hard on this step, is just the facts. So don't tell me what you think it means. Don't make guesses. Oh, hey, there's a metaphor. No. Just literally, what are the facts? What is happening in this particular sentence or this particular line? After you've gone through the poem and you've kind of paraphrased on the poem, so you've got out to the side of each stanza, okay, well, let's see. The painter is painting her dog. I mean, that's the kind of factual sentence you might have out to the side of a stanza. Then you come back to wherever you're writing the TPCASTT, where you wrote T, the big capital T, and we're talking about the title, you write capital P, and then in basically it says no more than 3 sentences, but it should probably be more like 1. Give me the plot of the poem. Don't interpret it. Just tell me literally what's happening. So if this is a poem about a painter painting her dog, then, you would say she's painting her dog, and then the dog jumps on the painting and it falls on the floor and it's ruined, and that's it, right? You don't try to tell me what it means. You're just paraphrasing. And the reason we do this is because if you don't understand kind of the plot, like, the action of the poem, then you really can't get into the interpretation. So that's step P. After you do the paraphrase, then you are on to speaker here. And this is who's the speaker of the poem. And I'm not asking you to find the person's name because that's not going to happen most of the time. It's who's the speaker. Is this an unnamed narrator? Is this a boy? Is this a girl? Is this an adult? Is it a child? Is it an animal? One thing you want to be really, really careful about with speaker is never, ever assume that the author of the poem is the speaker. Okay. In very few cases, an author will tell us, hey, I'm writing about myself. But even if you think, oh, hey, I know a lot about this author, she's got to be writing about herself. We can't make that assumption. Never, ever assume the author is the speaker. Don't make that assumption. And you just write down who you think the speaker is. Sometimes this is really useful and it's meaningful and it has a lot of impact on your interpretation of the poem. And sometimes it's just, hey, it's an unnamed narrator and you move on. Okay, the next step where it says connotation and figurative language, and this is the C and the F in the title. This is where you go back to the poem and you write on the poem two things. Well, two steps, I guess. Connotation is that emotional meaning of words. And in poetry is condensed, right? I mean, you can't use as many words to create your meaning as you can in a novel. So they're going to use more powerful words. But you want to be really picky about marking connotation, because you can go totally overboard and like, oh, hey, there's connotation in every word. And that's not true. Just where it's really, really strong connotation, when it jumps out at you. If you don't see anything that jumps out at you, then don't mark connotation. And generally what I do with this is I put a capital C over the word and I underline it in the poem. And that tells me, hey, this has got connotation. Now, and then if you don't have any connotation, or even if you do, then you want to go through and you want to, on the poem again, find figurative language. So this is where you look for metaphors and similes and imagery and irony and personification and onomatopoeia and hyperbole and all of those figurative language things that you guys study in English classes. And again, you're going to put all that on the poem. And so when you come back to your page where you have the capital letters, you're literally just going to write next to the C on the poem, because I'd much rather see it marked on the poem than I would just a list someplace, because that doesn't tell me anything. After you do C and F, you do attitude. This is the tone. What is the tone of the poem? And, you can have more than one tone word. You can, the tone can change, then you write everything, whatever you've got. After attitude, you have shifts. And shifts are really important in, especially, well, in all literature, but you see them they're more obvious in smaller pieces of writing like poetry or short stories. It's where there's a change, a significant shift. It could be a shift in speaker. It could be a shift in time. It goes from present to past or vice versa. It could be a shift in tone. Happy, happy, happy. Whoa, thunderstorm. Shift in tone. It can sometimes it can be punctuation. You can see in my document here. It can be stanza divisions. It could be a change in sentence length. Any sort of significant shift. If it stands out to you, then it's significant enough to write down. Not all poetry has a significant enough shift. My rule of thumb is, if it's significant enough that I could actually maybe write a couple of sentences about it in terms of interpreting the poem, then it's significant enough to write it down. If it's like, oh, hey, it went from stanza 2 to stanza 3, but there's not really any change, then I'm just going to say no shift. After shift, you come back to title again. And this time it's a little bit different, because now you want to go back to that title and you want to basically try and figure out, well, was I right, first of all? And does the title contribute to the meaning? Sometimes titles have really great meaning that add tremendously to a poem, and sometimes they don't. So it's going to be dependent on the poem. After you do title, your last T is theme. And this is where we write a thematic statement. And I have included the, let me see if I can find it. The how to write a thematic statement. This is another one of your handouts in your handout section, but I've attached it to the assignment. This can give you a fancy fill in the blank sentence that you can use to create a theme statement if you want it to. It's got all kinds of helpful hints, but what's most important are the abstract concepts back here, because what you do when you write a theme, and you guys do this on the list sheet, it's the same thing, is you come up with an abstract idea like love or hate or revenge or, grief. And then you ask yourself, well, what does the poem tell me about grief? What does it tell me about growing up? And the sentence you write on the capital T is, in this example, making a fist, it argues that blank, blank, blank is true about, I don't know, war or whatever. And you can use the thematic statement. You can use that. Well, that's not what I wanted. Sorry. You can use this little fill in the blank thing if you want to, because here you are is about, here's your topic, your abstract concept reveals, well, what about it? Humans always persevere, or war is hell, whatever it is that you're going to write. And by the time you've gone through that, you have really analyzed that poem. And if I ask you later to come back and write about it, you've done a tremendous amount of pre-writing. So that's really what a TPCASTT is. And hopefully this was not too long and it helped you understand what it is I want you to be doing.